Program Director, the leadership of the Daily Maverick, the media as a whole, political parties present here, Chapter 9 institutions, civil society organizations, ladies and gentlemen. I am grateful for this opportunity to address this event. Firstly, though, I must apologize for the fact that I'm not there in person due to the fact that I'm attending a good governance conference outside the country. I do wish you well, though, in this very important dialogue. I've been asked to speak about the state of democracy in South Africa from the perspective of the Public Protector. Upfront, this may sound like a political appraisal, and you will understand that the Public Protector has to be apolitical. Our role is to be neutral. I thought, therefore, that I wasn't expected to make a political appraisal of the state of our democracy. However, I was expected to make an appraisal of our democracy based on the point of view of the fact that the Public Protector is one of constitutional bodies established under Chapter 9 of our Constitution to support and strengthen constitutional democracy. The role of my office is to strengthen constitutional democracy through investigating and redressing improper conduct in state affairs. And my comment, therefore, can only be from that point of view. Let us go back to what Madiba once said about how government operates and why we need checks and balances, such as the Public Protector. Almost 20 years ago, Madiba said, open quotes, "Even the most benevolent of governments are made up of people with all the propensities for human failings. The rule of law, as we understand it, consists in the set of conventions and arrangements that ensure that it is not left to the whims of individual rulers to decide on what is good for the populace. The administrative conduct of government and authorities are subject to the scrutiny of independent organs. This is an essential element of good governance that we have sought to have built into our new constitutional order. An essential part of that constitutional architecture is those state institutions supporting constitutional democracy. Among those are the Public Protector, the Human Rights Commission, the Auditor General, the Independent Electoral Commission, the Commission on Gender Equality, the Constitutional Court, and others. It is amazing that former President Mandela classified Chapter 9 institutions together with the Constitutional Court. That's one of the things that I would like to talk to you about, is the role of Chapter 9 of the Constitution in strengthening constitutional democracy. And how has it really strengthened constitutional democracy in the last 20 years? Of course, I've been asked to also look at the gap between the promise of constitutional democracy and the reality we've experienced in the last 20 years, and perhaps hesitate a few ideas on how we could address the gaps going forward. But again, I will do so from the point of view of strengthening democracy through strengthening good governance, because my office promotes good governance. When we scrutinize government action on the basis of improper conduct or maladministration, we're basically looking for signs of bad governance with a view to telling government what needs to be done to strengthen good governance as an element of constitutional democracy. As a public protector, I have already indicated that we strengthen constitutional democracy through investigating and redressing maladministration or improper conduct. That power comes from Section 182 of the Constitution, which states the following: the public protector has the power, as regulated by law, to investigate any conduct in state affairs or in the public administration in any sphere of government that is alleged or suspected to be improper or to result in any impropriety or prejudice, to report on that conduct and to take appropriate remedial action. That basically gives this office three kinds of powers. First, it's really the power to make a decision on propriety. That's the power. It's the power to judge people's conduct, that it was proper, it was improper, to report on that conduct, and the power to correct whatever we consider to be broken because of the improper conduct. And that's the power given by the Constitution. From our side, we have crafted ourselves a mission statement and a vision statement. I would like to read only the vision statement, where we say, as a public protector, we intend to be a trusted and effective and accessible public protector that rights administrative wrongs within the state and consistently acts with integrity to ensure fair, accountable, and responsive decision-making, service, and good governance in state affairs and the public administration in every sphere of government. We do our work based on the Constitution. However, we have also looked at good practices around how do we do our work. The public protector is an institution called an ombudsman, created in Sweden more than 200 years ago. It was brought into the picture of the governance architecture because of gaps that had been noticed by the King of Sweden. When he came back from the Middle East, we are told, he found that his people were very angry because of excesses in the exercise of state power. Rather than face a revolt, he decided to create an ombudsman, and we're told that he had seen something similar in the Middle East, and it's often said it must have been Turkey, but we're not sure. The ombudsman was going to be the ears and eyes of the king whilst giving the people a voice. Whenever everything else had failed, the ombudsman would listen to the people. In fact, if you go to Sweden, the ombudsman office has, on the steps of the office, huge ears, like little ears, where basically that's the statement they're making to the people of Sweden, that this is where you are going to be heard when bureaucracy has silenced your voice. Because often in the state, people are faced with a bureaucracy that seems to have no ears and seems to have no eyes, doesn't see you and doesn't hear you. But what happens in that is that it undermines constitutional democracy, because eventually people may take the law into their own hands. We've seen in Northern Africa where people then took to the streets when they felt that there were excesses within the state and they felt disempowered in playing a role in curbing those excesses. They felt the courts were part of the system and that they couldn't register their concerns through the court system. And we know in every country that the courts are an important pillar of the democracy architecture. They're an important part of the rule of law. But for the average person, who in our institution we refer to as Gogo Dlamini, going to court is not always an easy option. Firstly, it is expensive. Secondly, it is a very complex discourse in court. But thirdly, it is an exclusive discourse. Even if the courts were acting perfectly, often people don't understand the mechanics of the court. They don't know how the answer was arrived at. Even if, for example, the decision that was made was just, somebody could still come back and be angry with the court system, or would be angry about whatever complaint they had before, despite the decision being just. With an ombudsman, you have an opportunity that a platform will be created where you don't have to be sophisticated to understand and to be understood, because the language is simple. There's no heads of argument. There's no sophistry in how you express yourself. That expands democracy because it gets people to ask questions of those they've entrusted with public power and get answers that they understand. And they feel that it's not that kind of disparity between David and Goliath. Because they feel, even if I'm Gogo Dlamini, I can ask the president why he did certain things. I can ask a minister why he or she did certain things, a premier, a mayor, etc., through this avenue. That keeps democracy balanced. It keeps faith in the system. People feel that it's our system, and when it doesn't work, we have the power to raise our concerns, and the system has the ability to correct itself. And that's why in South Africa they decided to bring in the Public Protector as one of the institutions supporting constitutional democracy. In South Africa, you will see the documents that led to the establishment of this office. One of them is the Ready to Govern document of the ANC. And various things were proposed in that document. And one of the proposals was a public protector. And the document spoke about the importance of an independent institution called the Public Protector, which would be given extensive powers, including the ability to remedy whatever it found to be improper. And if you look at how the Public Protector was eventually conceptualized under the Constitution, you will see that it was an attempt to give it as much powers as possible and to scrutinize administrative actions of government, and also to give it the power to remedy the consequences of whatever maladministration it had found. Based on the work that we've done as a public protector, we have found that by and large there is compliance with principles of good administration and good governance. However, there are worrying trends that are developing, and those trends have been picked up in Chapter 14 of the National Development Plan, which was developed by the National Development Commission. The Commission comments on the state of governance, problems of corruption, maladministration, and systemic failure to do the right thing in certain circumstances. They also comment about the importance of these Chapter 9 institutions in ensuring public accountability, and they also comment about the importance of public accountability, and that's where we've come in. We have found that there are problems around obeying the law in appointments, particularly at local government level. There are problems around procurement, particularly when we're talking about bulk procurement of bulk infrastructure, such as RDP housing, water, electricity, and roads. We also have found emerging problems, which I was discussing with one government department, around the use of privileges for employees of the state, whether they are public officials or public servants, or they are members of the executive and other public office bearers. We've picked up problems around excesses in security privileges, for example, excesses in accommodation and the use of travel privileges. And I was benchmarking with a fellow organ of state that had found similar worrying trends. And from our side, of course, we've worked with government to address these issues. Perhaps I should talk about an example of some of those that we have dealt with. We have dealt with systemic service failure, where the systemic service failure was as a result of irregularities in employing people and irregularities in procurement, coupled with failure to obey the law. Examples in this regard would be depolicing, where we come up with a report that is called A Glimmer of Hope. We called it A Glimmer of Hope because we worked with them to hold their hand in assisting them to identify the defects in their system and in beginning the process of correcting those administrative defects, which were systemic and therefore affecting service delivery throughout that particular municipality. And those defects would be the kinds of people they employed. In some areas didn't have the right skills. Their procurement, where they would procure people who didn't have the necessary track record, and there wasn't absolute quality assurance to make sure that somebody who was paid for fixing a road had fixed the road, and a person who was paid for building 200 houses had built 200 houses and not 100 or 150. And we worked with them. We had similar challenges in Nala, in the Free State, at a municipality, where again employment irregularities had been observed, procurement irregularities. And with regard to procurement, the municipality had paid for RDP houses that had a waterborne ablutions system or sanitation system. But the waterborne system could not be used by the residents because the pipes were ending right in front of the toilets. They were not piped in such a way that they go into a main pipe which takes the sewage to some place where everything is discarded. Because of that, the toilets couldn't be used. They were now using a bucket system. Even that was dysfunctional because the buckets were not collected as frequently as the contract said. But people were being paid. The ones who built the RDP houses with the toilets were paid for the toilets. Somebody must have signed to say the toilets have been done according to the specs. But surely they would have flushed those toilets and noticed that they can't flush because the system is not going anywhere, but they were paid. To cut the long story short, the problem we experienced there was not only the procurement irregularity, but it was also the failure to act when government became aware of the problem. Because government became aware of the problem, and then a forensic investigation was ordered. And we came at a time when the community was complaining that a forensic investigation was done and nothing was done with the outcome of the forensic investigation because the people were well connected at a political level. And when it came in, those allegations were confirmed, but the municipality started acting. At that stage, they had an administrator or an acting municipal manager who listened to the complaints and the suggestions that we made about how things could be done. The sewerage system was also not working globally, and there was really excrement everywhere because the purification plant had also been paid for but not been properly completed. That was fixed, but at a cost. And by the time we finished with them, they hadn't even finished with the plant because they needed extra money. But what do these stories tell us? That in our constitutional democracy in the last 20 years, a lot of good work has been done around keeping the promise from the point of view of designing policies that seek to implement the promise, especially around socioeconomic rights, basic services for the people. However, the outcomes have not been as good as the policies because of maladministration. People appointed beyond their competency, people being irregularly appointed, tenders issued wrongfully, people paid for false billing and overcharging. That has obviously undermined then the ability to deliver at the pace we would have delivered had there not been maladministration. Another example I could give is Oliphant's Hook, where children didn't go to school for a whole year, allegations of corruption, service failure. Again, when we investigated, we found that most of the allegations were true. And one of the emerging practices that I spoke about earlier was the abuse of benefits. We found there that, yes, it was true. People who are not allowed to be housed at state expense were housing themselves at state expense. The argument there being there's no policy on it. But one would have assumed that if there's no policy on it, then you don't do it, because public power should always be exercised in accordance with the law and in the public interest. The presumption, therefore, is that in the public sector, we can't enjoy a benefit unless there's a law that extends that benefit to us. If there isn't, then we have to create one. If we see a gap and there should be a benefit, that should be sorted out in terms of the law. There are good things, though, that are happening, just going forward around the gap between the promise and the reality. I have indicated that there's a good promise in the Constitution, particularly around what are our people entitled to. What I didn't mention is that everyone is promised in the Constitution an improved quality of life, and everyone is promised that their potential is going to be free. The Bill of Rights then concretizes these promises by promising specific rights, such as the right to human dignity, the right to equality, and various freedoms. It also promises socioeconomic rights, such as access to education, access to health, access to food, access to social security. Now, we've seen laws that concretize that in policies, and then actions that seek to implement. What I've just spoken about are examples of how the good intentions of delivering on the promise have been sabotaged by maladministration, which takes us back to what Madiba spoke about even the most benevolent of governments could get it wrong at the level of implementation. And we've seen that government good intentions is the very same government that contributed to the creation of the Constitution and an elaborate legal framework. But at an implementation level, there's been human failings, as Madiba foresaw. We come in together with the courts and other structures that ensure public accountability to investigate where appropriate if public power has been exercised appropriately. But we also sit around the table with these parties to show them the way on what is the right thing to do. And I would say that our contribution to the party is slightly different from the traditional mechanisms in that we have an opportunity to sit quietly outside the glare of the public with organs of state and show them where they went wrong, and also show them alternatives that are in line with the spirit of good governance, particularly in line with Section 195 of the Constitution, which outlines principles of public administration. We've also brought to their attention Section 96, which regulates what members of the executive should do. Section 40, which talks about cooperative governance. We've also brought to their attention Section 237, which requires that constitutional obligations should be put first, and they should be performed expeditiously and with due diligence. And of course, that is not always happening in the glare of the media or the people. That's why we say we perform our work by whispering truth to power. And that's the ombudsman's way since Sweden invented the institution. And here we have an example of the Makatsi among the vendor people. The Makatsi is not an elected official, but a senior officer nonetheless. And she whispers to the ruler about what people are complaining about, excesses in the way people are treated, and excesses in the way those in power may be using the resources for their own benefit at the expense of the people. And usually rulers listen carefully to the Makatsi and refine their way of doing business. And that's what we try to do. Very few of our cases end up in the media, and people think those are the main cases. If we look at the year that we've just completed on the 31st of March, our workload was almost 40,000 cases. The number of cases we concluded is over 23,000. It's over 30,000 because I know that what we're carrying through is about 12,000. If you look at that, none of those cases have been in the media. We're helping the Gogo Dlamenes get their jobs back. Just the other day, we got a grade R teacher her job back. And 2 weeks earlier, we had gotten a small business person his money back after it had been owed to him since 2007, and his business had died because of that. Now, we become a safety valve to communities when the traditional pillars of democracy fail them. We then provide them an outlet, but it's still part of constitutional democracy because it allows them to converse with those they've entrusted with public power. It allows democracy to move forward as a conversation. In ending, I would say, therefore, our constitutional democracy 20 years down the line is alive and kicking. We do, though, need to pay attention to maladministration. We need to look at lessons that have been drawn from my office, the Auditor General, the Public Service and Administration, and other institutions, and use those lessons to transform the system further. When we inherited it, it was always going to be a problematic institution. I remember that President Mandela spoke about the institution being inward-looking rather than outward-looking. It was always needing to be transformed so that it puts people first. And together, we can use the next 20 years of democracy and the lessons we've learned in the last 20 years of democracy to further transform the state to ensure that it is accountable, it operates with integrity at all times, and that it is responsive to every person in this country. And again, going back to Madiba, he says about institutions supporting constitutional democracy. We are mindful from the very start of the importance of accountability to democracy. Our experience has made us acutely aware of the possible dangers of a government that is neither transparent nor accountable. To this end, our Constitution contains several mechanisms to ensure that government will not be part of the problem, but part of the solution. When he got the Nobel Peace Prize, he said the following: "Let it never be said by future generations that indifference, cynicism, or selfishness made us fail to live up to the ideals of humanism, which the Nobel Peace Prize encapsulates." I wish you well in your deliberations, and hopefully the outcomes of your deliberations will make us wiser as we navigate the next 20 years of our democracy. Thank you.
Know more about your world. eNCA.com